Hey everybody, welcome to chapter 11 and the cardiovascular system. So we're going to be going through the heart and blood vessels, which make up your cardiovascular system. And of course, you know that the blood runs through the cardiovascular system and are the taxis. So this is kind of like the roadways, and the hub is the heart. The heart is a closed system. So you have the heart that pumps blood, and the blood vessels are where the blood circulates. The main function is to transport oxygen and nutrients to our cells and then to take waste products away from our cells. The heart size is about the size of your fist. So if you make a fist and look at it, that's about the size of your heart. It's located in the thoracic cavity in the region between the lungs, right in that like area where the mediastinum is. The orientation of the heart, you have the apex, which is directed inferiorly and rests on the diaphragm, and the apex really rests towards the left hip, and then the base points towards the right shoulder. And so here you can see the apex of the heart is right here, and it's pointing to the left hip, and then the base is up here. The base is pointing to the right shoulder. And so here, this line here is is the mediastinum region of the thoracic cavity, and the heart sits right in that area. Okay. The heart has multiple protective coverings. So it has a pericardium, which is a double-walled sac. Surrounding the outer layer is called a fibrous pericardium. And then we have an inner layer, the serous membrane, which is composed of a parietal and a visceral pericardium. In between the parietal and visceral pericardium, we have serous fluid, and serous fluid allows the heart to pump without any pain or friction. So here's that fibrous pericardium. And then deep to that, you have that serous membrane with the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. And then in between would be the serous fluid. There are three layers to the heart. We have the outer layer, which is the epicardium. The epicardium is also the the visceral pericardium. The middle layer, which is the thickest region, is the myocardium. This is cardiac muscle. And then deep to that, the inner layer is known as the endocardium, and it is endothelial tissue or endothelium. So it's an epithelial tissue. And then oh, shoot, there we go. Okay. And then inside is the actual heart chambers. So there are four chambers to the heart. We have two atria and two ventricles. Atria are known as your receiving chambers, while ventricles are known as your discharging chambers. The atria take in blood from the body, and the ventricles discharge blood to the body. And so we have a right and a left pump associated with our atria and ventricles. So if you look up here, you can see the right atrium, and over here is the left atrium. Then you have the right ventricle and left ventricle. The right atrium takes in blood from body tissues. The blood that comes in is oxygen depleted blood, so it's poor blood. And then it goes out through the pulmonary, or out from the ventricles into the pulmonary system, to the lungs, where you're going to gain oxygen. The left atrium then takes in blood from the pulmonary system. It's oxygen-rich blood. You can see these four blood vessels are bringing blood into this right atrium or left atrium, and it's oxygen-rich. And this sends blood into the left ventricle, which discharges out through the aorta and out to the system with oxygen-rich blood. So because the left ventricle is pumping out to the entire body, it's going to have to be a stronger muscle, whereas the right ventricle is pumping just to our lungs, which is right next to our heart. The left ventricle has to pump blood all the way to our brain and all the way down to our toes. So it's going to be a lot stronger, which is why the left ventricle tends to be a lot thicker than the right ventricle. Between the atria and between the ventricles, we have a separation known as the interatrial septum and interventricular septum. These keep the right and the left sides from allowing mixing of blood. And so up here, they don't really show the interatrial septum, but it's right up here is where we would have the intraatrial septum if you saw the two atria without these blood vessels, okay? And then down here, you can see the interventricular septum right here. At this point, you should be able to tell me what the major function of the cardiovascular system is, what surrounds the heart and provides protection to the heart. You should be able to name the 4 chambers of the heart. Tell me which chambers are called receiving chambers and which chambers are called discharging chambers. Tell me why the left ventricle is so much thicker and more muscular than the right ventricle, and what separates the right and left sides of the heart. We're going to stop. Well, you know what? No, I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to talk for a little bit longer. I'm going to talk about the double pump system. So I told you that the right and the left side pump separately. So I'm going to talk about that and then I'll stop this lecture, okay? So the heart is considered a double pump. We have arteries that always take blood away from the heart and veins that always bring blood to the heart. The right side is a pump that sends blood to the pulmonary system. The left side is a pump that sends blood to the systemic system. Blood flows from the right side of the heart to the lungs and then back to the left side of the heart. So blood that flows to the lungs is oxygen poor, but blood that flows from the lungs back to the left side is oxygen rich. So basically, the right side of our heart receives oxygen poor blood from our body and then sends it out to our lungs so we can gain oxygen. Oxygen-rich blood from our lungs is going to be sent back to the left side, and then that oxygen-rich blood is going to be sent out to the body. So the right side is called pulmonary circulation. The left side then is systemic circulation. And systemic circulation, basically you're taking the oxygen-rich blood that was just returned to the heart and sending it to the system where our cells can take the oxygen and nutrients and use it for whatever they need. And then oxygen poor blood comes back to the right atrium. And so this is a picture of that systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. So here we have blood coming in from superior inferior vena cava to the right atrium. Blood then moves from the right atrium into the right ventricle. It goes out into the pulmonary trunk and to the lungs. At the lungs, we have gas exchange, so we get oxygen-rich blood coming back through our pulmonary veins into the left atrium. The oxygen-rich blood moves down into the left ventricle and then is pumped out of the aorta into the system, where we again have gas exchange at our cells. All of our cells take in the nutrients and the oxygen poor blood comes back to the right atrium. The heart valves allow for blood to flow in one direction, so we don't have blood flowing from the atria to the ventricles and then back to the atria again. And then we also don't have blood flowing from the ventricles out into our blood vessels and then back again. So we have AV valves and we have semilunar valves that protect us. The left AV valve is known as the bicuspid valve or mitral valve. The right AV valve is known as the tricuspid valve. The semilunar valve that separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary artery is known as the pulmonary semilunar valve. And the semilunar valve that separates the left ventricle from the aorta is called the aortic semilunar valve. So AV valves are anchored to the walls of the ventricles. They're anchored by these chordae tendineae, which are attached by papillary or to papillary muscles. And so when the heart is relaxed, blood can passively flow from the atria to the ventricles. But when the ventricles get start to contract, those AV valves close and they don't open up or invert into the atria. Semilunar valves are controlled by the pressure, the differences from the heart, the ventricles, and the blood vessels. So here you have blood coming in to the right atrium and the right atrium and left atrium. As blood comes in, it pushes on the AV valves and they open until blood fills in the atria and starts moving into the ventricles. So the ventricles start to fill slowly, but then the atria contract, forcing more blood into the ventricles, and this puts pressure on those ventricles. So then the ventricles contract, and that forces the AV valves to close. The chordae tendineae, held by those papillary muscles, keeps the AV valves from opening inverted into the atria. And so now there's a lot of pressure in those ventricles. So because there's pressure, oh, well, hold on. Yeah, well, I'll just go through this. So now you just remember there's a lot of pressure in those ventricles. So here we're looking at each step again. So initially you have blood coming in from the atria. This puts pressure on those AV valves. The AV valves open and hang limp, and blood can now move into the ventricles. So blood starts moving into the ventricles slowly, but then the atria contract, pushing more blood into the ventricles, which then stimulates the ventricles to contract, which pushes the AV valves closed. The AV valves close, and now we have extra pressure inside the ventricles. Okay. So when you have when you have a lot of pressure in the ventricles, this buildup of pressure in the ventricles causes there to be more pressure there than in the blood vessels, and this is going to force the semilunar valves opened. So semilunar valves in both the pulmonary and systemic system are thrust open and blood flows out. As the blood flows out, the ventricles relax. Now there's higher pressure in the blood vessels. Blood starts to move back. It starts to flow back to the ventricles. But the way those valves are shaped, as the blood flows back, it actually closes the semilunar valves. So again, let's just look at it stepwise. So we had those very, very contracted ventricles. The pressure in the ventricles is higher than the pressure in the arteries, and that forces those semilunar valves open and blood flows out. Once the blood flows out, the ventricles start to relax and blood starts to move back towards the ventricles. This causes those semilunar valves to close, and then the blood has nowhere else to go but away from the heart. hold on one second. The last thing I'll talk about in this video then is cardiac circulation. So there's blood flowing through our heart continuously, but that blood is not nourishing our heart. The heart has its own circulatory system consisting of the coronary arteries and veins. Coronary arteries branch off the aorta. Actually, the first branch off the aorta is the coronary artery, and this supplies the heart with oxygen-rich, nutrient-rich blood. Cardiac veins then drain that blood back into a coronary sinus that then sends blood back into the right atrium. And so here you can see the coronary arteries. So here you have the left coronary artery. Here, this is another branch called the circumflex artery. Over here you have that right coronary artery. These are going to feed the 4 chambers of the heart, and then the blood, once the nutrients get to the muscle, then the veins are going to bring blood back to the coronary sinus, and the coronary sinus dumps the blood back into the right atrium. So at this point, you should be able to tell me what pulmonary circulation is, what systemic circulation is, what is a bicuspid and a tricuspid valve, what is the function of your semilunar valves, how do AV valves work, what is the function of the chordae tendineae, how do semilunar valves work, and what is coronary circulation. I'm going to stop here because I think a 17-minute video is long enough. So I'll get the next video started in just a few minutes. Bye.